So this criminology student thinks he's smart enough to commit the perfect crime. And for a while, it looks like he might actually get away with it. The guy's name is Brian Koberger, and when this story begins, he's 28 years old, studying for his PhD in criminology at Washington State University, which is basically learning all about how criminals get caught and how investigations work. Now here's the crazy part. Brian is living just a short drive from the University of Idaho campus in Moscow, Idaho, and he's been watching a specific house near campus for months, driving past it repeatedly, studying the layout, figuring out who lives there and what their routines are. On November 13th, 2022, 4 University of Idaho students are having a normal weekend night. Madison Mogan and Kaylee Goncalves are 21-year-old best friends who've known each other since middle school, and they go out to a local bar with friends. Zana Kernodal, who's 20, and her boyfriend Ethan Chapin, also 20, go to a fraternity party. Around 1:30 in the morning, Madison and Kaylee leave the bar and stop at a food truck for late night snacks, and there's actually security footage of them laughing and having fun, completely unaware that someone has been watching their house. Now they get home around 1:45 a.m. and Zana and Ethan arrive shortly after. The house has 6 bedrooms total, and 2 other roommates are sleeping on the first floor. Sometime between 3 and 4 a.m., someone enters the house through an unlocked door. This person is wearing dark clothing and a mask, and they're carrying a large knife. What happens next is absolutely tragic. The intruder goes room to room, and all 4 students are attacked while they sleep. The crime is so quick and so quiet that the 2 roommates on the first floor don't hear anything unusual. One of the surviving roommates actually wakes up because she hears some sounds, and when she opens her door, she sees a figure in dark clothing and a mask walking past her toward the exit. She's so terrified that she locks herself in her room and doesn't come out. It's not until almost 8 hours later, around noon, that one of the surviving roommates calls for help. And when authorities arrive, they discover all 4 students have passed away. The community is absolutely shocked because Moscow, Idaho is a small, quiet college town where serious crimes like this basically never happen, and suddenly 4 young people with their whole lives ahead of them are gone. Investigators start working the case immediately, and at first they have very little to go on. There's no obvious reason, no signs of forced entry that they notice right away, and the person responsible left almost nothing behind. But they do have one key piece of evidence from security cameras in the area. A white Hyundai Elantra that was seen driving near the house multiple times that night, circling the neighborhood, and then speeding away right after the estimated time of the incident. Police release a public announcement asking for information about this white Hyundai Elantra, and this is when Brian starts to panic. He owns a white Hyundai Elantra, and right after that announcement goes public, he suddenly drives 2,500 miles across the country from Washington to his parents' house in Pennsylvania, claiming he's just going home for the holidays. But investigators are building their case quietly. They pull cell phone records and discover that Brian's phone was near the victim's house at least 12 times in the months before the incident, which shows he was repeatedly visiting that location. On the night in question, his phone goes completely dark, meaning he turned it off, but then it comes back online shortly after as he's driving away from the area. Then there's the DNA evidence. At the scene, investigators find a knife sheath, and on that sheath, there's a small amount of DNA. They run it through databases but don't get a direct match, so they use genetic genealogy, which is the same method that caught the Golden State Killer, where they build a family tree using public ancestry websites to narrow down potential suspects. This leads them directly to Brian's family. Once they identify Brian as a suspect, they start watching him at his parents' house in Pennsylvania. Investigators go through the family's trash to collect a DNA sample, and when they test his father's DNA, it's a familial match to what was found at the crime scene. That's enough for an arrest warrant. On December 30th, 2022, law enforcement surrounds Brian's parents' house early in the morning and takes him into custody. When they search his apartment and vehicle, they find he's been obsessively cleaning everything, trying to remove any potential evidence. His white Hyundai Elantra has been deep cleaned inside and out, but forensic teams still find traces connecting him to the victims. Brian is brought back to Idaho, and when his information becomes public, people start researching his background. They discover he was fascinated by criminal psychology and would post in online forums asking about criminal behavior and motivations, which in hindsight is deeply disturbing. They also learn he had very few friends and had made several people uncomfortable with his behavior, including following someone around at a previous workplace. As the case moves forward, prosecutors reveal they have DNA evidence, cell phone data placing him at the scene, surveillance footage tracking his vehicle, testimony from the surviving roommate who saw the masked intruder, and evidence that Brian had thoroughly researched the area before the incident. His trial begins in April 2025 and it becomes a major news story. The prosecution shows a timeline of Brian making multiple trips to scout the location, choosing a specific night, entering through an unlocked door, and carrying out these terrible actions with what appears to be planning and intent. The defense argues that the evidence isn't definitive, that DNA can be transferred in innocent ways, that cell phone data isn't perfectly precise, but the amount of evidence pointing to Brian is really substantial. The trial reveals that Brian may have been fixating on someone at that house specifically, possibly watching them for months, though investigators never determine an exact reason for what he did. What makes this case particularly notable is that Brian genuinely thought his education in criminology would help him avoid getting caught, that understanding investigation methods would let him stay ahead of law enforcement. But he didn't account for modern forensic technology, genetic genealogy, digital tracking capabilities, and the fact that even the smallest piece of evidence can lead investigators right to you. After weeks of testimony and evidence presentation, the jury reaches their decision, and Brian Kohberger is found responsible for what happened to Madison, Kaylee, Zana, and Ethan. He receives the maximum sentence, and while the families finally see some accountability, nothing can bring back the 4 young lives that were taken that night or restore the futures they should have had.